So let's start. Why stop building back tourism?
Why stop building back tourism? Yeah, I think building back better is a slogan that's used for many decades already by people who usually want to take advantage of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
To return to business as usual, but then with a more profitable business model, because everybody has lost now in terms of business models these days. So everybody wants something in return from this rebuilding. I think we have to acknowledge that tourism has become a way for big corporations and big tech to get 90 to 95% of the tourism economy, while the local communities in the global south are left with the crumbles. Local communities often get only 5% of what we spend in a holiday destination, UNEP research found. So destination communities are not heard, don't have a voice. They are not on any of these tables where tourism is planned. In fact, largely for the benefit of big business and national tax income. And even worse, local people suffer from nuisance, from exploitation, and from huge price inflation. So tourism development has made prices soar. Look, for example, at the Chinese model in Sihanoukville, Cambodia. It's the most recent one from the last 2-3 years, which is maybe the worst type of capitalism ever seen. Local people see their homes taken, rent and food becoming too expensive. They end up in the gutter, becoming slaves of the rich, foreign tourists that are just there to consume alcohol, drugs, and rock and roll, and the rest. So big businesses exploits local communities through tourism and takes advantage of poorly protected, vulnerable people who have little alternative. This system should not be built back.
Okay. Okay, clear word. But nevertheless, UNWTO says that tourism is looking for 10% of the jobs, and they estimated around 100 billion people have lost their job by the crisis. So from what shall the people live?
I think we have to realize that international financing institutions have devastated many rural economies by forcing them into our system of export and imports of food and products. So social structures and local production have collapsed. That has costed jobs, that took jobs. Cost of living soared, so people left local agriculture, local villages, and had to go for this little money that tourism jobs provide. So the tourism industry has offered people jobs that are not decent and that are underpaid and that are close to slavery often, very often. As an example, the Indian tsunami disaster of 2004, it let many things come to the worse. The Maldives prevented many thousands of local fishermen families to return to their islands. They were even there after the tsunami, but they were evacuated, but they need to go away to be able for the government and investors to take these islands, seize them, to create high-end tourism resorts. This took jobs rather than created them. The poor fishermen's villages ended up in the slums of Maldives cities, towns, in poverty and crime. Also, in the same year, the IFIs told the government of Sri Lanka that thousands of local fishermen at the east coast should not be allowed to return to their beaches and coastal villages in order to allow international hotel investors to build hotels on these beaches. So in both places, this has costed an enormous amount of jobs. Tourism doesn't only provide jobs, it also destroys them and replaces independent jobs by jobs that are dependent from the international market. So it would be better when the IMF, the World Bank and the Chinese One Belt, One Road would stop investing in new colonial imperialist infrastructure, but instead invest in the local community livelihoods and economies. That is where the jobs are, that is where the jobs were, and where they should be in the future. China is concentrating all production in China, killing the local economies in the rest of Asia. If I travel in Asia, I can only find products from abroad, for example from China, while they should be made in all of the countries themselves, and they had been made 10 years ago. So these 100 million people that are now not having any more a job should be given their jobs back by the World Bank, the IMF, our development aid institutions, and by the Chinese Development Bank. That's my
Mm-hmm.
solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you say it's more important to give back to people the jobs they have lost by tourism than the jobs in tourism.
Partly. Uh, I think when the crisis comes like in 2008, and now with the COVID, tour operators give Western clients their money back. Well, they stop paying their local staff and they stop paying the accommodations in the destinations. Well, these costs would only be a few percent of the overall cost of our bookings. So yes, tourism should also remain in areas, but on better conditions, where we have a role to play, and also booking platforms also have a role to play. For example, Booking.com made a profit of $5 billion in 2019, but when they saw their turnover drop in April 2020 due to the first corona crisis, they asked the government to pay for their staff in their offices who earn an average of 50,000 euros per year. They were paid. But did they compensate the local hotels in the global south for their losses? No, they didn't. So big tourism corporations care for their stakeholders and shareholders, but not for their local owners, hotel owners. So I think in the short term, the tour operators and the booking platforms should pay for these people's jobs and keep people also involved in tourism. So they shouldn't all go back to agriculture, because that system is often broken. But we have to make sure that the corporations in tourism, and that includes also Google and other big tech, would make these people dependent from our tourism trips. It's them who broke the contracts last year. It's them sitting on billions of dollars. It's them who have shareholders who each have more money than the local hotel owners. So when they would take the responsibility, local jobs in tourism would be a lot less at risk.
Mm-hmm. What do you propose to restore or to recreate the jobs in tourism, or you think it's not a good idea to recreate them?
Yes, we have to. Well, we have to create a different type of tourism in which the destinations play a central role. And I think we have created a market money-based economy in these destinations that was not always there before. So, for example, from our perspective as a traveler, I think we have the power for to a large extent. Either we buy into a trip or not. Now, for example, we pay a percentage extra to an emergency fund to get our money back in times of bankruptcy of the tour operator. And we get our money back or a voucher when the trip is cancelled due to Corona. I think from now on, we should be obliged to pay an additional percentage that should help in our ticket fee, or trip fee, which should help local communities to reshape their own future in combination with building a more resilient livelihood, including food production and including tourism. And the food that they produce should also be used in tourism and not imported. So the whole tourism sector should, I think, voluntarily or involuntarily add, for example, 5% to the prices of our tickets and our holiday cost for host communities' welfare, social security, education, and another 5% actually also to produce synthetic kerosene to help decrease our contribution as travelers to the climate emergency. So travel has become far too cheap for travelers, but it has become far too risky and expensive for those who are depending on it in the global south. So that should be reversed to make tourism profitable for them. And that is what we should ask from our legislators and also from our tour operators associations.
Mm-hmm. Could you the digital tax which is in discussion, I think in the EU, would that be a solution to put the digital tax, especially on the big digital platforms when they are making bookings?
It depends what we're going to use this digital tax for. When you often see that tourism tax is not always used to improve tourism, but do other things with them. More effective would be to add a tax to both travel and any holiday that is dedicated to, on the one hand, fight the climate emergency, and I think we need to invest in producing synthetic kerosene instead of using fossil fuels, and a budget for local tourism communities that are depending on our tourism to make them more resilient against our whims and our greed, because we go for the cheapest possible travel, cheapest possible holiday, because that is advertised. That is where the booking platforms are competing on prices. We are offered, say, oh, hey, this is the cheapest room, cheapest price, cheapest travel, cheapest trip, and we can't change that, but we can, on top of that, add a tax that is used not for the treasury, but for the people who own the problems.
What can travelers do to make tourism more sustainable?
There is hope in the first place. Thousands of small tour operators are there that actually offer very good trips, and they are often very committed to sustainability and to their local staff and host communities. That's the small ones, not the big ones, but there are exceptions. So 75% of travelers say they want tourism to be responsible and that they are keen to travel in a sustainable way, but almost nobody is doing this really. So I think everyone chooses the cheapest way of travel because that is what tour operators and booking platforms offer you, and say, oh, this is the cheapest and this is number one on your list. And they advertise on price, they compete on price and on little else. So we need to make travelers aware that for the longer term, we should really stop making poor people dependent on our market-driven concepts, our whims and our greed, and we should stop going for the cheapest trip. Well, we may not do that, but then we have to be forced to pay an extra fee, as we are always also forced to pay an extra fee for when the company goes bankrupt. So we should show travelers the devastation that results from tourism, from tourists going to a place because it's the cheapest way to drink beer, have drugs, and surrender to all our addictions, whether it's in Amsterdam or in Southeast Asia. So we should say, as NGOs, as aware citizens, show and speak the truth, and that's why it's so important that what we initiate as a Good Travel Guide and you as fairunterwegs highlight other values in tourism and travel. We should help local communities and local businesses tell their story in a positive way, in an emotional way, and it's a value and a privilege for us to visit them, not at the lowest cost. We should show the alternative to surrendering to your addictions at the lowest possible cost, and it should become almost a shame to do that. I mean, it's flight shame, but also I think there is kind of this also is horrible to do that, and to go to a monk in Luang Prabang in Laos and to actually only take advantage of the almsgiving tradition to make a great picture of yourself with a poor monk. So we need to offer sufficient good alternatives. That's what we need, and there's a lack of them. We really need to identify more opportunities for people to do good rather than go cheap.
That's why you have founded the Good Travel Guide.
Yes.
Last question to the tour operators: what can they do?
Tour operators, as I said, there are really many. I think even the majority, they are really committed to the good, and some of them already have tried to increase their prices to, for example, compensate for the carbon emissions. I think some of them also are ready to pay their local staff and communities better, but they should be very clear in that, and not say, oh, we are sustainable, but tell the stories that they're doing, tell the way they are they are not making local people and the destinations depending on them, but they contribute to good livelihoods, and they use local foods. And I think telling the good story will eventually be in their benefit and also in our benefit, because we need to read about that.